certain coatings or paints that you apply, you have to wear a full bodysuit so that you're not exposed to it. Nanoparticles, for example, that you're spraying can't be filtered out with a respirator. All these esoteric chemicals that can be applied, that can be done from a distance where it's safe, that aren't applied now because there is no way to do them from a distance that's safe.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 396. How are precision drones revolutionizing hazardous jobs and saving lives? For that question, we head to Jacksonville, Florida, to speak with Robert Dahlstrom, founder and CEO of Apellix. Apellix is a software-driven aerial robotics company that creates cutting-edge robotics platforms for precision painting, coating, cleaning, and testing, making hazardous jobs safer by removing the risk of personal harm. Apellix technology enables pressure cleaning and special coatings to be applied to large infrastructure assets like highway bridges, water towers, oil rigs, and even battleships, saving tax dollars and private expenditures while extending the life of the assets. Apellix also provides technology for non-destructive testing at an unprecedented level. Using Apellix aerial platforms, cruise ship owners, Navy commanders, or state departments of transportation can collect thousands of readings on a surface where in the past only 10 or 20 readings could be taken. Robert has 6 fully granted U.S. patents and has received numerous engineering, invention, and teaching awards. He has also published over 50 papers and articles, spoken at multiple conferences, events, and podcasts, and is an author on a chapter on non-destructive inspection in the Handbook of NDE 4.0. He is an FAA certified drone pilot, a business mentor for Startup Quest, Startup Weekend by Google for Entrepreneurs, and a volunteer at Startup Accelerators. In this episode of the Drone Radio Show, Robert talks about how Apellix revolutionary drones are making it safer and more efficient to complete hazardous jobs, including coating, pressure cleaning, and non-destructive testing. But before we hear from Robert, I want to thank those of you who have been supporting my funding campaign. Whether it's $1, $100, or much more, you can help defray the cost of production and keep the podcast going and growing. Go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And by the way, if you have a great story on the use of drones that you'd like to share in a podcast, contact me at randy@droneradioshow.com. Now let's learn how autonomous robotic systems are saving lives and reducing costs with Robert Dahlstrom of Apellix. Let's pick up the interview where I asked Robert to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Bob Dahlstrom from Apellix. I'm the founder and CEO here.
Bob, tell us about Apellix. What does the company do?
So Apellix has kind of flipped the model of drones on its head. Instead of flying far and flying fast and delivering packages, or maybe even doing videos or visual inspections flying next to structures, we actually designed our systems to make physical contact with structures, to take readings and or fly a precision path so that you can apply paints and coatings. And then also we have a version that we've launched now that does pressure washing, so it can do some limited surface prep to clean a surface before you apply coatings to it.
How long has Apellix been in business?
Yeah, we've been around since about 2016 is when we really got our start. But that was a lot of early work, because when you're doing something that's never been done in the history of the world before, and it's deep tech like what we're doing, it takes a lot of work to get to the stage where you can have an autonomous system flying at a compromised location made to go where drones typically don't fly.
Let's talk about the evolution of the products. You originally started out with a drone that paints.
Yeah, so we kind of work backwards. We start out with the hardest one, and Right now, we're launching our easiest one. So we started out with a spray painting drone. And if you can imagine, how difficult it is to make a self-driving car, you might even say it's even more difficult to do a spray painting drone because when you stop your car, it stops. You can't really stop a drone. And then the precision we're flying with, it's not like if you're 2 inches off and you're taking a video, it's still okay. If you're 2 inches off and you're spraying paint, you've just messed up your paint job. So we've put a lot of deep tech into designing the circuit cards, the printed circuit boards, the different software that runs on the embedded systems, on the laser guidance, on all the work that's required to do that precision flight control. Because one of the things we're doing with the spray painting drone, for example, is laying down 8 mils wet, which then dries to usually about 6 mils. A mil, by the way, is a thousandth of an inch. So they call it coatings instead of paintings because we're not going to be painting houses. Definitely not. That's complicated and that's low value add. But when you talk about warships or assets in oil and gas, those coating jobs are protective coatings. And there you may be putting on a paint, right, that protects the underlying asset. And that asset could be worth $1 billion or something. So, you have to make sure that these coating systems are applied properly with not too much paint, not too little paint, the right number of coatings, the right coatings, all that, which is perfect for drone application, right? Because a drone is a flying computer and you get a lot of insight that normally is missing when you have a human applicator of the coatings.
How does the drone apply the coatings, and where does the human interaction come in?
So one of the things I tell people first to get them to understand is that these are tethered systems, right? So the power comes from the ground, the paint comes from the ground. They can theoretically stay up there all day and paint. Then because the precision flight control is so tight, right? For example, if a pilot is flying an aircraft, by the time they move their thumbs and adjust the flight path, it may be a half a second or a second. With onboard software, maybe we're making 50 or 100 micro adjustments to the flight per second. So it's just always better to have software flying these systems rather than people. And for painting, as an example, believe me, I've tried and I've had, people that have spent hundreds of hours on trying to fly these things manually. It's just pretty much impossible. You can't do a very good job. So what we did is we developed these systems to do the spray painting. So there's a laser guidance. So there's a tripod with a laser that's tracking the drone in 3D space. That is fed back to the onboard computer on the aircraft to help it navigate. And then there's a LiDAR, which gives the drone information about everything around it. That's also fed into the onboard computer for the precision flight control. So it's got these multimodal sensor arrays that are being fused with the data to give the autopilot information to keep it very, very close and very, very accurate to apply paint. Now, the painting drone is still under development. We just finished testing with that with our painting partner, International Paints, AkzoNobel. We finished their testing. They had it over in the UK in December. We have it back now. We have a path to development where we will then have this out in the field. But the way it works from a human perspective, from an operator, is the pilot is just there to fly the drone up to the structure, what we call the gate or the window, where they're pointing the drone in the right direction, and they can be 1 meter or 3 meters away, but as long as they're pointing towards the structure and where they want to start, then they push a button on the tablet. And at that point, it's hands off. The pilot is then there just watching the system. And then, if they need to take control of it, they can.
During the test, what sort of results have you been able to achieve?
This is the fantastic part with working with one of the largest paint companies in the world. They've been able to educate us. They've been a fantastic partner, bringing to the table everything we needed to know to be able to build this system to do the protective coatings. So the things that we can do better than a human right now would include perpendicularity. So that means the spray wand is always pointed to the wall. It's not tilted at an angle up or down or left or right. It's always perpendicular to the wall. So that the drone does better than a human. Speed, we lock it in at, for example, 0.6 of a meter per second, which is about what the average arm movement is with a human. We're better than a human at keeping speed. Distance to the wall is another critical one. If you're too far, the paint doesn't make it to the wall and you get a thin coating. If you're too close, the paint can run or drip or the paint bounces off the wall. So we're in the range of slightly better than human than that. But the part that we're not as good as a human yet And the part that we're developing now, which will be kind of the final thing that we do before we start field testing this, is making an overlap where if you got one stripe of paint, you come back with your drone and line up that second stripe of paint perfectly. And ideally, you'd have like a 50% overlap on each line. So we're not quite there yet on that, but we're getting there.
Well, it's all pretty exciting.
Oh, it's super exciting. And then one of the other things we've done is we've taken the same software and we've made it go in and make physical contact with the structure to take readings because they need to measure the thickness of these coatings. And it does no good to have a robot paint the wall if you then have to bring in scaffolding or bring in a lift or a crane or rappel down with ropes to take a little probe tip and touch to the wall to check the surface to see how thick the paint is. So that's a very esoteric world. Not a lot of people know about non-destructive testing, but it's a very important aspect in the world of protective coatings for anything from infrastructure, maritime. All these things are standards driven, where they require painting to certain standards and measurements and all these different requirements to make sure the coatings have been applied properly.
How do you quantify the results or measure performance?
So when you paint a ship, it's SSPC PA2 standard, which means every 10-foot square, you have to randomly select 5 spots where you take a paint thickness measurement. And then for 1,000 square feet, you select one more random 10 by 10 foot square area, take 5 readings there. And then for 10,000. But what happens is if you do that with a person, it obviously is time requirement because you have to get your lift. You go up, take your readings, come down on the lift, move the lift over, go up, take more readings, come back down, move the lift over, go up, take more readings. The drone's already up there and it can pop out these readings much, much faster than a human. So a good example there would be an above ground storage tank. It might take a human right now doing an API 653 inspection a full day to get maybe 80 readings. And we're getting 100 readings an hour with the drone. So in a day, we can end up with 800 readings. And that's measuring the thickness of the steel. Measuring the thickness of the paint is faster. There we could get 1,600 readings because we get about 200 readings per hour. So it's much faster. It's safer, obviously, and it frees up that person, that engineer that's taking those readings to look at the data and make their analysis and say, oh, okay, well, here's some areas where the paint's too thick or too thin, or here's some areas where the steel is too thin. We need to cut out that steel and add more steel.
Plus, with a drone, one does not have to be in close proximity to harsh chemicals.
And think about it. Certain coatings or paints that you apply, you have to wear a full bodysuit so that you're not exposed to it. Nanoparticles, for example, that you're spraying can't be filtered out with a respirator. So, all these esoteric chemicals that can be applied, that can be done from a distance where it's safe, that aren't applied now because there is no way to do them from a distance that's safe.
When will the drone be commercially available?
We're hoping to start field trials in 2024 of the spray painting drone.
Let's turn to the pressure washer drone. First of all, how did you go from a painting drone to the pressure washer drone?
Yeah, and this goes back to my contact. We started with the most complex use case, the spray painting drone, which isn't available. The next one, which is almost as difficult, is the non-destructive testing, where the drone has a probe tip and a robotic arm that makes physical contact. And then the one we've launched now, the surface prep drone or the power washing drone, is the simplest of the three. There, we're using a lot of the same technology. So we had already developed the heavy lift industrial aircraft for painting. We had already developed the power system that powers it from the ground. We just ended up modifying, instead of a spray wand that does spray paint, we put a spray tip on there that does, cleaning agents, for example, or rinsing agents. And the nice thing about that is we tell people, oh, we've got a spray painting drone. And they're like, yeah, but I have to prep the surface before I paint it. I have to make sure it's clean before I put the paint on. I still have to scaffold it. Well, now we have products that can clean the surface. Eventually, when it comes out, the drone that can paint the surface, and then one that can measure the thickness of the paint over time and tell when it needs to be repainted.
What's the capacity of the drone?
So we have 2 models. The B1 is the battery-powered version, and that does what's called soft wash. And that's typically defined as 300 PSI, but it's high flow. So it's like 8 gallons per minute compared to like your garden hose, which may have 3 to 4 gallons per minute. So that is used a lot for chemical cleaning, where if you've got a biological growth agent on something, mold or mildew, You spray a biological cleaning agent on there, and then you rinse it down. And that's battery powered. You're still carrying a hose with the material that you're pumping up to the drone. The tethered version for power, the X1, that does the 3,000 PSI. So you're doing the 3,000 PSI at about 8 gallons per minute.
What type of asset requires a 3,000 PSI pressure wash?
A good example would be, and we've got a case study of this where we did our field trials, elevated water towers. So in certain areas of the U.S., these elevated water towers will have a growth of mold or mildew on them. And not only is that bad for the coating, it can reduce the life of the coating, and that's expensive. I mean, it can cost $750,000 to paint one of these elevated water towers, and that's a 30-year paint job. So basically, if you amortize that, it's $25,000 per year. In the case study we did, we had a coatings representative come out there and look at it and say, oh, you extended the life of the coating by 3 to 5 years. Well, $25,000 a year times 4 years, we saved the municipality $100,000 by cleaning that asset. So it has a lot of ROI in certain use cases.
Can it be used to clean commercial buildings or smaller assets?
We've done everything from heat exchangers at power facilities to hospitals, but then people have used our systems also for above ground storage tanks and then also commercial cleaning, buildings and windows.
Does Apellix perform the pressure washing?
Yeah, so what we do is we get contacted a lot by the asset owners that may want something, but that's not our job. We're not a services company. We sell these drones to the services companies that do the job. So what we do is we refer it to people that have purchased one of our drones.
What are the benefits to the service company? Why would they want to purchase the system?
So a lot of this is what are your current costs and how can it be done faster, safer, and cheaper with the system? And so if you go back to that case study, half of the water tower was done with the drone, half of the water tower was done the conventional method. Well, the conventional method required a 150-foot elevated lift out there that a person would ride up in and take their pressure washer and wash off this, elevated water tower. So saving money on the lift is a big one, but also the safety factor. These are dangerous jobs where people can fall. I tell people, it's 2013. Why have people up there doing a job when you can have a robot up there doing it instead? It's much safer. What
have been the major challenges in developing the drones?
Well, obviously, it is making drones fly in locations they were never meant to fly in. Well, I simplify it a lot, but I tell people drones need 3 things to fly. One is they need to know where in the world they are, and they typically get that from GPS. But if you're in the middle of a tank farm or behind the ship's hull, you can't see GPS, you're GPS denied, or you have no GPS signal. The other thing it needs to know is which direction it's headed. Gets that from magnetic compass. Big piece of metal says, hey, I'm north. So that information is compromised. And then the third thing a drone needs is, how high off the ground is it? It gets that from barometric pressure, just like airplanes. But when you're next to a structure, your barometric pressure readings are wrong. So all the things that are required for flight that is typically used by an autopilot on a drone become worse and worse the closer and closer you get to a structure. That's why it's dangerous to fly these manually. And that's why it's important to have software because the software can just control for those variables much better than humans can.
For the user, how much information do they need to input before the software knows what to do?
It's going to depend on the job. As we develop it, we'll add more and more features. Right now, it's sort of you manually line it up and start it, and it goes in a straight line, either vertical or horizontal, however it is you want to do it. And then when it gets to the end of that line, you stop it and say, drop down 18 inches or go up 18 inches and do another line. So you can change the variables or say, instead of being 14 inches from the surface with the spray tip, go to 18 inches from the surface. So you can change variables like that. But for the most part, right now, it's line by line where the operator is, the drone pilot is then, saying, okay, start the next line. Okay, start the next line. Stop that line and start the next line. Now, the power washing drone is a little different. The power washing drone, you don't need that precision. You're typically back, sometimes 10 feet, 20 feet from the structure when you're blasting it with water. So that is predominantly manually flown.
It'd be nice one day to be able to take a picture of what it was that you wanted to paint and let the software figure out all the other parameters from the scan.
Yeah, that's exactly what's in our patent, and that's what we're moving towards on the product development roadmap.
Going back to the case study, is there something that you want to make sure we highlight?
So there's a couple things about the case study. One is it was designed to see how effective this was. So we had an independent analysis done, and both sides of the tank were equally clean. The drone obviously did it without the need for a lift, but the drone also did it with a crew of 2 in 2.5 hours, where the other half of the tank was done with a crew of 3, and it took them 5 hours. So it's a little faster. It's also a little less, requires a little fewer people. But the big savings comes in from not having to have a lift there. And then that's also where the safety factor comes in. But then these things are very interesting. Often these water towers are a sense of pride for their local communities. And it's interesting, if a water tower gets dirty on the outside, the citizens of the municipality typically think their water quality is poor, because if they think there's dirt on the outside, they think maybe the water's dirty on the inside. So keeping them clean not only looks better and helps with civic pride, but it also, again, extends the life of the coating. Like that one example, extending it 4 years and saving the municipality $100,000.
How big was the water tower?
131 feet tall in Wooster, Ohio. It's called the Old Man Road Water Tower, which was prominent in the city. There's like a park around it, so it's close to a school. We were doing, I think, 5 water tanks in the area, and that's the one we chose to do the man versus drone study.
When will the pressure washer drone be available?
We've just launched that. So we've had the field trials done. We've had our version of the X1, the power version, tested and ready, but we have some supply chain issues to get the components we need for the power. So we've gone ahead and launched with the battery version.
Seems like everyone's having problems with supply chain issues.
It's interesting because we're also working with the U.S. Army. They saw our pressure washing drone, and they've got the need for using it with some automation. So we're adding in some automation to it. But even with that, having a contract with the Army, the chip manufacturers, because these are specifically computer chips that we're having a shortage of, can give us priority, but they still don't have the chips.
So give us a rundown on the pressure washer specs.
So the B1 power wash system, it's a heavy lift drone. It's 8 motors, so it's 4 arms, 2 motors on each arm. It does the 300 PSI at the pump, 8 to 10 gallons per minute, and it flies up to 120 feet on battery. Usually that'll last. Depends. I mean, we've had 31 minutes out of it, but we've also had 20 some minutes out of it. So depending on the pressures and how much weight you're lifting, how heavy the hose is. But also we calculated that 120 feet based on FAA 55-pound regulations. Because when you're at 120 feet, the weight of the drone, the weight of the batteries, the weight of the water in the hose and the hose itself total up to just under the 55-pound limit. And then that's a $29,000 drone. And then the one that's powered from the ground that can theoretically stay up all day, that's a $59,000 drone.
What have the last 7 years taught you about producing industrial-grade drones?
Well, it's interesting. For example, oil and gas, right? With refineries, they did not want drones in their facilities at all. And then now you look at them, these oil and gas companies have their own drone fleets where they're doing visual inspections all the time. So you've seen an acceptance, but it's interesting because certain systems that benefit the asset owner tend to be adopted by the asset owner, but not the engineering groups that are contracted to do those services. So we're starting to see a little bit of shift in that as the industry changes. But we've also seen, all of us have seen the changes in the industry where initially drones were just cameras, flying cameras, where we've seen now they have different types of sensors that do a lot of amazing things. So the proliferation of new sensors has been fantastic to see that come on board.
What kind of interest have you had on the products?
Oh, it's absolutely unbelievable. We have Fortune 500 companies contacting us all the time saying, as soon as you get this spray painting drone ready, we want it. We've got these use cases that can unlock tremendous amount of value. I've had architects contact me and say, you've changed architecture, because when you build a structure, you have to worry about how you can maintain it. Buildings now are no longer boxes like they used to be. They're very complex geometries. And they require the systems to be able to clean them and then paint them and coat them over time. So, having a flying system that can do that has really changed things.
What advice would you give to other entrepreneurs?
I would say it's an exciting time to be in drones, and it's a very exciting time to start a drone business. In some respects, drones today are very similar to where the personal computing market was back in the 1980s, 1990s. So it's just at the beginning of a revolution in industries. And so it's very exciting to find those use cases that are able to unlock value and do things, that you hear quite often, the dull, dirty, dangerous, but also, you're doing things that are dull, dirty, or dangerous, but you're also doing things that are safer, finding things that unlock economic value.
And for my final question, Bob, what message would you like to leave regarding the future of the drone industry?
I think the future of the drone industry is fantastic. As we move from having the idea where drones are cameras to the idea where drones can actually do physical work in the world, where we see robotics merging with drones, like what we've done at Apellix, where we've added a robotic arm with a hand or an end effector at the end of that, you see the future opening up to a wide variety of possibilities. Because if you have drones right now that can make physical contact with structures to take measurements, pretty soon those drones will be able to make physical contact with structures to do things like maybe weld or cut or brush or whatever it might be. So as we move more towards replacing humans at elevation with robotic systems at elevation, we're creating a safer world that can be a better world that opens up a lot of avenues that weren't available prior to doing it robotically. And think about it. One aspect of that is right now, you're limited what you can do as a person. Certain coatings or paints that you apply, you have to wear a full bodysuit so that you're not exposed to it. Nanoparticles, for example, that you're spraying can't be filtered out with a respirator. So, all these esoteric chemicals that can be applied, that can be done from a distance where it's safe, that aren't applied now because there is no way to do them from a distance that's safe.
That's it for episode 396 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Robert Dahlstrom of Apellix. I want to thank Robert for taking the time to speak with me. If you want to learn more about Apellix or want to connect with Robert, check out the webpage at apellix.com. If you like the Drone Radio Show, please consider supporting the podcast with a small donation. The content is always free, but for as little as $1, you can help defray the cost of production. To donate, go to droneradioshow.com/donate. And thanks for listening. Your support means a lot to me, and I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Gors.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.